Today we've got a little change of scenery as I'll be out here in the hayfield all day long. In previous years, I would sort of chip away at working this ground up to be ready to plant by the end of November. But this year with my new working situation, I was able to sort of time this a little bit better. This year, I decided to wait until we got a little rain shower and, you know, assuming that we would get one, I would disc the ground directly after, because the funny thing about this ground is that when it bakes out in the sun all summer long, by the end of summer, this ground is almost as hard as concrete, and it makes working it up extremely difficult. On the flip side of the coin though, when this ground gets a little bit of moisture in it, it works up beautifully. And you can see with just one pass from the disc, these clods are broken down perfect, and we're left with a really nice fluffy bed. As many of you know, I'm a small farmer, which means I cannot justify owning big equipment. So I do all of this groundwork with a 90 horsepower New Holland TN95. I would love to have a bigger tractor and be able to disc this in a few hours, but it just doesn't make sense for me to do that. I can get over this field in one day. It's a long day, but it can be done. And it's just hard to justify spending all the extra money to get bigger equipment to shave a few hours off of that. Because this tractor does have front wheel assist with that 90 horsepower, the rear tires are filled, and we've got wheel weights on the back, so this thing is pretty heavy. And all of that enables me to pull this 10-foot disc. My disc is a 10-foot wide Domrees, and I believe those blades are 22 inches. At least they were when they were new. While this disc may be small in width, when you look at the way that it's built, it's actually, I mean, this is a big reason of why I bought this disc, is because it looks to me like it's built as heavy as a much larger disc, but it's only 10 feet wide, so you don't need as much horsepower to pull this thing. The way a disc works is it's simple, but it's kind of ingenious when you really think about it. As the bottom of that cupped blade goes into the ground, it's basically like making a scooping motion. It's like you're scooping the ground up. And then as the blade comes to the top, it's a throwing motion. So what this does is it reaches down in the ground, scoops that ground up, and flips it over. It's kind of the same premise as what a plow does. A plow flips ground, but usually with a plow you're going much deeper, 8, 10, maybe more inches. A disc, especially a small one like this, I'm lucky to get 6 inches down, but more likely I'm probably getting about 4 inches. Running the disc out here accomplishes two things. The first thing that we're doing is we're taking the stubble or what's left over from last year's crop, and we're turning it up, mixing it in with the ground so that it can better decompose and add some organic matter to this soil. The other thing that we're doing is fluffing the ground up and breaking these clods up into smaller, manageable sized pieces. Ideally, you want your ground to work up, I mean, about as fine as you can get it, because we've got to think about the big picture. In a couple of months when I throw seed out here and cover it, the finer the ground is, the better it will cover that seed, and the more seed to soil contact we will have, which will increase germination and just make for an overall much better hayfield. And speaking of breaking up clods, you might be wondering what this thing behind the disc is. I call this a ring roller, and I have been educated by many of you in the past that most of the rest of the world calls this a cultipacker. But if you ever find yourself in Northern California, call it a ring roller. The ring roller is made up of many rings. I'm not sure exactly how many there are here, and they all kind of float on a rotating drum. The rings all have spikes on them, as you can see, and as it rolls over the ground, these spikes are just poking, and they're breaking up the clods. When I make the first pass with the disc, I'll usually go on a little bit of an angle here through the field. And while that's not the most efficient way to get over a field, the reason that I do that is because I know pretty well that I'm gonna have to hit the field a second time with the disc. And for that second time, I will go straight down the field, and that is the most efficient way to cover ground. So I'm gonna let this sit for a few days and dry out a little bit more, and then I'll come back and hit this again with the disc. And at that point, I think we're gonna be ready to float and smooth this field out. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys, and I hope I'll see you again on Farmer Tyler Ranch.